Hello, everybody, and welcome back. This is Suspects and Spirits, and I'm your host, Taylor Seraphin. Welcome back, my lovely little coven of ghoulish guys, gals, and non-binary pals. I love you all. What is up? Hope you're having a good day. I'm sipping on some piping hot tea over here. Actual tea, not gossip. I don't have any gossip for you today, but just sipping on some tea. You know, my throat's a little scratchy. We went to the pumpkin patch last night, which is probably why my throat's scratchy, but it was so much fun. We picked some big ass pumpkins. We saw some cute little animals, you know, little moo cows and goats and all the cute little farm animals. We went on the train. I got a corn dog, which made my whole night. It was delicious. I love a corn dog. And yeah, we had the best time. My my oldest enjoyed the zip line, and my youngest realized that she does not like the ride that slingshots you out and in and goes around and around really, really fast. Laughing because I told her, I said, this is faster than the swing ride. I was like, the swings are, you know, they're one motion. They maybe go up and down a little bit and they go slightly faster towards the end. But this one, like slingshots you outward and then pulls you in and you get smushed in the little seat. And she was like, no, it's fine. I'll try it. And I was like, okay, it's kind of like the Mater ride that we went on at Disneyland. You loved that ride, right? Like trying to hype her up. I was like, you know what? You're right. You'll love it. Um, she did not love it. Did not love it at all. This poor child, so traumatized. She had fun for like 0.5 seconds. And I'm holding her as tight as I can, just trying to like console her and be like, it's okay. You know, close your eyes. It'll be over in like 2 minutes, 2 more minutes. And then the guy cranked it up, you guys. So one of the kids goes, crank it up. And he made it go faster. Oh man. I was like, this poor child. So she was not happy with that ride. We got off and she goes, Mom, that was not like the Mater ride. I was like, okay, you got me there. I was just trying to encourage that decision of wanting to try something new because she does not like fast rides or rides with drops. Like, she was so mad at us when we went on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride because we didn't tell her about the drop. And afterwards, she was like, I'm never going on that ride again. She was so mad. She was like 5, or maybe 4. I think she was 4. And yeah, she was not a happy camper. So yeah, she doesn't like rides like that. She doesn't like that feeling in her tummy of like her stomach dropping, which valid. Okay, I get it. Not everyone likes it. I love it. She doesn't. Neither does my husband. So I totally get it. So I was surprised when she said she wanted to try this ride at the pumpkin patch. I was like, okay, like let's do it, you know, I'll hype you up. Now we know she doesn't like it. Which is just weird because she loved the Mater ride. Like we were laughing so hard I was gonna pee my pants when we went on that ride at Disney. So I think it was different because the guy cranked it up so fast. And it's also like, you know, dark. There was really no like fun lights on the ride or anything. Like on the swings, they had the cute little flashy lights and stuff. But oh, my poor baby. She was a trooper. She made it through. She survived barely. I will be hearing about it for the rest of my life. So yeah, I'm just drinking some tea though because there was a lot of hay and a lot of dust. It was really beautiful weather. Like we lucked out. Usually Arizona pumpkin patch season is like hot and sweaty, but it was overcast the whole time, about 80 degrees, really breezy. So beautiful. But that also meant lots of dust, right? Dusty, dusty, musty, all up in my nose. So now my throat's a little bit scratchy and I'm hoping that it's from the pumpkin patch and I'm not getting sick at the end of fall break because that would be no good. No bueno. That's not what we want to happen. I need to stay healthy because I'm going to Cali soon with my sister-in-law. We're going to a show and I've had these tickets since like January and I will not miss it. I'm very much that person that's like, nothing will ruin this for me. I'm going to have fun. I'm going to have a good time. So I will not miss this show. Oh, and speaking of shows, I know I mentioned this in one of my past Booze Clues episode about how I was really bummed because I didn't get tickets to see My Chemical Romance when they went on tour this past time. Sorry, I just hit my microphone. Sorry if you heard that. I'm just getting really excited. I'm talking with my hands. But I was bummed because last time I didn't get tickets. You guys, I finally did it. I saw that My Chemical Romance was coming to Arizona for the first time in years because they were boycotting Arizona for so long. I was like, I'm getting my tickets no matter the cost. And you know what? The cost is between me, the credit card company, and Gerard Way. I got them. I got the tickets. I was so excited when I saw the little message pop up on Ticketmaster, when it's like, "You got them." Yeah, I did. I have to wait a whole year, but it'll be worth it. It'll be so worth it to see G and Mikey and Frank and Ray. I'm so excited. My husband has said that he will go with me. Now, mind you, remember, he did not he wasn't really into My Chemical Romance. I think he knows like 2 or 3 of their songs, and that's it. He is not batshit crazy like me because he just didn't get into them really, which I understand. Now, whether he is prepared for this experience or not, probably not. I told him, "Okay, it's an experience. It is performance art. It's political, it can be very dark sometimes, and if you don't understand the underlying messages, then it can be very misconstrued." I love when people complain. They'll, go to an MCR concert and then be like, "I came for a concert, not politics." Dude, first of all, have you ever listened to any of their albums? This is not new. Also, just historically, alternative rock, pop punk, punk rock, any of that genre has always been political. It just has. And if you've ever seen Pink Floyd's The Wall, what Gerard is doing is really no different than what they did in that film. Gerard was an art student, and I think it's just so funny when people are like, "Oh my gosh, clutch my pearls." Yeah, guys, the art student is making art again. Oh my. He wrote The Umbrella Academy. Okay, The True Lives of Fabulous Killjoys. He wrote The Doom Patrol. He was worked with DC Comics to become the founder of the Young Animal imprint. He's very creative, and the songs always have a deeper meaning. Most artists do that. It's just that not everybody digs deeper into realizing what this is. My Chemical Romance created a whole language for their fans. It's deep. It's kind of like Ghost fans. If you know the band Ghost, then you know what I'm talking about. It's a whole experience, and I'm very excited. If my husband is ready for that, I'm not sure. We'll see how emo he can get. We'll find out. But I'm excited. I can't wait. 13-year-old, 14-year-old Taylor is freaking out right now. So insane. Man, and my seats they're not too bad. I got whatever seats I could get pretty much. And I will say that these ticket prices were not price gouged like the last ones were. At least for my location in Arizona, they weren't that bad. So, that's good. I'm glad I could get a decently priced ticket. Well, 2 tickets, because if my husband wasn't going to go with me, I was going to find one of my friends to go with me. This is definitely a bucket list item for me. If I could see Paramore live, I'd be even more elated. I'm sad because that will probably never happen simply because it doesn't seem like they're ever gonna get back together. They're all doing their separate things, but I will say Haley, Haley Williams, I'll be there, girl. I'll be there, baby. Since the release of All We Know Is Falling, that woman has had me in a chokehold. Her vocals are amazing, and I love what she is doing now with her solo platform. She's incredible. Just so incredible. I watched her the other night on Jimmy Fallon and was just mesmerized by her. And I feel like a lot of the stuff she did in that performance was very symbolic. It was giving a little bit of Kurt Cobain. It was. If you saw what she was wearing and the lighting and everything, very similar to what he had done. If you know, you know. Also, her new album having the upside down cross. I just talked about this in my last episode about how the upside down cross can represent humility, the cross of St. Peter, and then using her platform to show that you can't weaponize something like Christianity in order to make yourself superior. That's just not okay. You can't do that. Anyways, I could go on and on about her, but I won't do that. I will just say I love music so much. I mean, I told you guys I listen to everything, from Tupac to Pete Wentz. My goodness, I appreciate a good lyricist. I love lyrics. I love poetry, and I love how words can tell a story and heal generations. Music it's very cathartic, as is with any art form, but yeah. Anyways, that's my love letter to all creative beings. You are all wonderful and we love you. Now, what I do not love so much is the story that I'm about to tell you. We are continuing our countdown to Halloween with a really, really awful story about a young man named Chris Jenkins who disappeared on Halloween night. This happened in the early 2000s, and unfortunately, there are still a lot of questions about what happened to him. So let's get into the story. It was Halloween night in 2002. 21-year-old Chris Jenkins, a student at the University of Minnesota, vanished after a night out celebrating with his friends. Months later, his body was found floating in the Mississippi River. And what began as a presumed accident would evolve into one of Minnesota's most haunting mysteries. Chris Jenkins grew up in Dinkytown, Minnesota, which, first of all, that is the cutest name of a town I have ever heard in my life. And of course, it would be Minnesota. So, this was a neighborhood very close to his college campus in a suburb called Eden Prairie. Chris was a business and marketing major at the University of Minnesota. He was also a lacrosse goalie and the captain of the lacrosse team. He had a near perfect grade point average, and it was said that he really enjoyed school. He enjoyed his classmates. He loved everything about college life. Chris was also a beloved son to a wonderful set of parents who supported him in all that he did, and they just loved him unconditionally. To friends and family and others who knew Chris, he was described as very kind, very helpful, and very loyal. His parents also described him as very thoughtful, the kind of kid who went out of his way to protect others. His father, Steve Jenkins, once told reporters that Chris had defended a classmate with epilepsy who was being bullied, saying, quote, "He was always the one who stood up for people," end quote. This classmate he's referring to, when I looked a little more into this, I guess she was often bullied at school because of the protective gear that she wore, and Chris always stood up for her. People can really suck. Like, people can be so mean, especially, middle school and high schoolers. Get a life. Get a whole fucking life. In any case, I don't care if it's middle school, high school, college, cut it out. Stop making fun of people who are different from you. Don't be assholes. Kindness is free. Like, just be kind. I will never understand the need to bully someone because they're different. It actually infuriates me. So I really love that he stood up for this girl. Friends also remembered Chris as a fierce competitor, saying that he was a dedicated athlete and someone who did not back down easily. They also mentioned that he was just completely fearless on the field and that he was an amazing lacrosse goalie, not very easily intimidated by his opponents. He was always up for a challenge. And I guess that he was also a very talented swimmer, too. Sounds like he was a genuinely good person. He was close with his family, just he's like an all around good kid. Even his pictures, I mean, he looked so sweet. He had a very kind face, very soft eyes, and a soft smile. He seems like, a golden retriever human. And Chris was not just a good friend, an athlete, and son. He was also said to be a really great boyfriend to his then girlfriend, Ashley Rice. But unfortunately, as we know, Chris's life would end very abruptly just a few months into the school year. On Halloween night in 2002, Chris and his roommates hosted a keg party. But then around 10:30 p.m., Chris, his girlfriend Ashley, and three friends left for the Lone Tree Bar in downtown Minneapolis. Ashley had worked at the bar and she was not on shift that night, but she worked there. So this was a typical place that they would go and hang out. Chris was in a Native American costume and Ashley was dressed as a sexy police officer. I don't really know why that matters. What is important to the story is that Chris's costume did not have pockets. So Ashley ended up carrying his keys, his wallet, and his phone, his personal belongings. And it was said that this was one of the coldest nights in October that year, with temperatures reaching as low as 24 degrees. Now, what happened at the bar that night is a little bit murky. Several witnesses agreed that Chris broke up an altercation between two young men. So he saw two men getting into an argument, and Chris kind of got between them, was trying to break it up. Now, during the scuffle, I guess Chris spilled beer on his lap. And from there, is where the accounts start to diverge a little bit. Most sources say that the bouncers kicked him out, believing that he had urinated on himself from being too drunk. But a bouncer by the name of Tony, who actually spoke on Investigation Discovery's Breaking Homicide, he claimed that Chris wasn't thrown out, that he just seemed agitated and he walked out on his own, heading toward the Hennepin Avenue Bridge. Either way, Chris walked out of the Lone Tree Bar by himself. He walked out into freezing cold weather with no phone, no wallet, and no jacket. And this would be the last time anyone saw him alive. There were rumors that night about tension between Chris and his girlfriend, Ashley. Apparently, Ashley had a friend at the bar, Mike Casey, who was a police officer working security at the nearby Hennepin Center for the Arts. That night, Ashley had borrowed part of Mike's uniform for her costume, and some theorize that Mike may have been the reason that Chris left or was kicked out, perhaps maybe jealousy or suspicion. They're 21. They're drinking, they're having fun. We don't know if that's what happened, but it's not impossible. And as it turns out, Mike did drive Ashley home that night. So, I can see where, that speculation might come into play, but still, we don't know that that was the reason he left. All we know is that Chris left the bar without any of his personal belongings and no ride. The next morning, however, Ashley decided that she was going to return his belongings, and that is when she realized Chris was gone. So, like most of us would do in this situation, she called his parents, but his parents hadn't heard from him. No one had heard from him. And shortly after, Chris was reported missing. It took 5 days, 5 whole days, for the police to actually begin an investigation. Why, you ask? Great question. According to the police, initially, they suggested that he might have just, gone on a spontaneous trip in the middle of the night without any of his essentials or even a jacket. If he didn't have his keys, how's he getting home to pack for this spontaneous trip, right? Like, what car would he be going on this spontaneous trip of his in without any keys? Genuinely wonder how these officers came up with this idea. Like, get it together, you guys. And his family knew better. They always know better, always listen to the family, because even they said, guys, Chris has no money. He has no car keys. How would he get anywhere? They also said that he would never have vanished without a word. This was just not in his character. Months went by and still no word on Chris's whereabouts. So clearly, he didn't just go on a spontaneous trip. And panic had already set in. Panic had set in the moment those parents got that phone call. The community, the family, everyone was very, very concerned for his safety. And they had every right to be, because on February 27th, 2003, 4 months after Halloween, Chris's body was discovered in the Mississippi River. His body was found caught on a tree limb between the Hennepin Avenue Bridge and the 3rd Street Bridge. And here's the thing that really bothers me about this case. Originally, investigators ruled this as a suicide or accidental death. And before you go, Taylor, that's always a possibility. Please know, I understand that. I know that people do not always act the way that they feel. People can be depressed and you would have no idea. I get that. My issue here are the circumstances in which he was found and how he was found. So let's talk about that. Chris's body was found face up, fully clothed, with his shirt tucked in and his moccasins still on. Odd for someone supposedly lost in the current for months. His arms were crossed over his chest, and he was clutching a clump of his own hair in his hand. So this is why that ruling made me so upset in the first place. And this is also why the Jenkins family refused to accept the conclusion of accidental death or suicide. The family actually ended up hiring a private investigator named Chuck Loesch, who uncovered a series of very, very troubling inconsistencies. These inconsistencies eventually led to the case being reopened. Family and friends of Chris stood their ground and demanded answers. When the media got a hold of this, Emily Ashford of the Minnesota Daily spoke with those who were very close to Chris. A friend of his by the name of Chris Bailey, who was also a lacrosse co-captain with Chris Jenkins, said, quote, "We still need to find out what happened. There's really no sense of relief," end quote. Another friend and co-captain, Ben Sims, said, quote, "It kind of feels like all the bricks have been taken off my back and thrown into my stomach," end quote. Bailey went on to say that even though his body had been found, the feeling of emptiness remains. He also mentioned how he felt disappointed because Chris's body was found where volunteers had already searched. Friends and family were adamant that suicide was just completely out of the question. Ben Sims was quoted again saying, "There was not a depressed bone in his body." Again, we know, just because someone doesn't seem depressed doesn't mean they're not depressed. Well, I get that. How did someone who was supposedly in that water for 4 months still have their moccasins on their feet, their shirt tucked in, their hands crossed over their chest, and their hand clutching their hair? Steve Jenkins, Chris's father, encouraged students to abide by the buddy system to keep safe in downtown Minneapolis, which I think is a very wise thing for his father to have said, because again, that's very weird circumstances. You would think at some point, like hitting a branch, something would like untuck the shirt, maybe get that clump of hair out of his hands, rip off a moccasin. It's very strange. So now let's get into the evidence that the private investigator found that led to the authorities changing their stance and reopening the case. To do that, we're going to rewind a minute and we're going to look at the night that Chris disappeared. So eyewitnesses agreed that he broke up a bar fight and he spilled beer on his pants. Some suggest he was kicked out of the bar, others believed he left voluntarily, possibly intending to return for his belongings. Either way, though, he ended up alone on a freezing night in 24-degree weather. Now, Chuck Loesch, that private investigator, he said, okay, so at some point he left the bar. Loesch examined camera footage from the Federal Reserve Bank, which was really close to the bar. It had cameras overlooking the Hennepin Avenue Bridge that night, but neither showed Chris crossing the bridge at any time that night. So since he couldn't find any video or CCTV footage of Chris, he decided to get a canine unit involved. Bloodhounds were brought in and they tracked Chris's scent from the Lone Tree Bar to Times Square Pizza and Subs nearby. Then it led them into an underground parking garage beneath the restaurant to a parking stall reportedly used by one of the bar's bouncers that night. What they found there were blood droplets, red string, and a red feather, very eerily similar to the details of Chris's costume. Remember, he was dressed as a Native American. So that is where the red string could have come from, and the feather, and why were there blood droplets down there? Eyewitnesses even reported seeing a group of people assaulting someone outside the pizza shop that night. But none of it was thoroughly investigated, so therefore, no one could confirm if it was Chris. That part really bothers me because whether that was Chris or not, just no one reported that. Like no one looked into somebody being assaulted. What is going on? Now, it is rumored that the Lone Tree Bar, where all the friends were, where Chris and his friends were, allegedly instructed employees to stick to a story that Chris left on his own and to speak only with their lawyer. Which I guess, from a business standpoint, as a business owner, I get it from that perspective. Maybe you could understand not wanting to be held liable for something like this if it is one of your bouncers. But at the same time, if you know that you and your workers, your employees, your coworkers didn't do anything, or if you truly have no clue what happened, then there's nothing to hide. Like just tell them what you saw or didn't see. And if they push further, then yeah, sure, get a lawyer. But if you know something happened and you're actively protecting the person who did something wrong, no. Immediately no. And of course, guys, we don't know if this is true. It's just a rumor. I'm just making the statement that if you know something went down and can help in a situation like this, like always help, you know? Definitely get a lawyer. Asking for a lawyer doesn't mean you're guilty in any way. In fact, it's your right. Now, while we don't know if this is true, it's very interesting because there's also a story from someone visiting the bar months later who said that after taking a sip of his drink, he felt very disoriented and that bouncers tried to put him in a car, in a van, and he managed to resist and called a friend inside the bar for help. Now, you guys, if this is true, it is a much, much bigger problem than, my bouncer did something bad and I'm not a good enough human to report it. This would be something much, much worse. Again, do we know this for a fact? No. Um, it's considered hearsay, but I'm a little concerned here because how often do men report feeling woozy and disoriented after a sip of a drink? I would love to know the statistics on that. I should look into that. It just makes you wonder, like, is there something more sinister going on at that bar with those bouncers? What's happening? I would absolutely look further into those claims. And it just gets more interesting from here. During Chris's disappearance, hundreds of students, friends, and family members searched the riverbanks in Nicollet Island, which was known or is known for its underground caves and graffiti, but nothing was found. There was one thing, though, a cryptic message that appeared on a missing persons poster. It said, quote, "Loaded in trunk, paid for by Dollar Green." We don't know if that was written to just kind of fuck with the general public or to actually hint at something worse that happened. Either way, I I hate it. I hate it so much. So now, the growing pressure of this case made the Minneapolis police chief, Tim Dolan, reopen the case in November of 2006. So, three years after his body was found. When they reopened this case, they officially reclassified Chris's death as a homicide and issued an apology to the family. Investigators cited new leads, including a possible confession from a convicted murderer named Jeremy Lynn Alford. Alford, who is part of a violent group called the Dealers of Death, had a history of very extreme violence, including the stabbing and beating of a roommate named Douglas Miller. Alford and his brother Lewis were at the Lone Tree Bar that night, according to the bouncer. Now, when Investigation Discovery's Breaking Homicide covered the case, they did speak with Jeremy Alford. At the time, he was, and he still is, serving a life sentence in the Stillwater Correctional Facility in Stillwater, Minnesota. This was for what I mentioned before, the murder of a man, his roommate, Douglas Miller, in 2005. Both he and his brother, Lewis, admitted to killing their roommate and then fleeing to Iowa. Miller was reportedly stabbed 20 times and hit with a blunt object in the head. Then, the brothers set the home on fire and tried to cover up the evidence. According to Jeremy Alford, this was all done under the influence of methamphetamines, and this isn't something that they would normally do when sober, according to them. But when the show pressed Alford about Chris Jenkins' case through an alias, his reply was, quote, "I don't want to talk about anything I haven't been convicted of," end quote. Which I guess you can understand, right? If he's not connected, he doesn't want to make it seem like he is. And if he is connected, he's not going to self-incriminate. So at this time, no charges have been filed and no arrests have been made in connection to this case. The family, interestingly enough, has also mentioned that they have not had contact with the Minneapolis Police Department about their son's case since around 2010. It's all just such a mess. No one knows anything. Everyone's speculating. And then there's some people who know something who aren't saying anything. And then there are the reports of officers and investigators saying that, perhaps Chris had been thrown from the bridge into the water that Halloween night. But here's the thing. The physical evidence shown would completely contradict that statement because remember, when discovered, he was face up with his shirt tucked in and moccasins on his feet. Strikingly enough, his arms were crossed over his chest. as though someone set them like that. And then he was clutching onto a wad of his own hair, which to me suggests a struggle of some kind. And the coroner mentioned that he had no broken bones. The autopsy revealed a blood alcohol content of 0.12, so, high, maybe stumbling a bit, but not incapacitated. And there were even traces of GHB in his system. Now, if you're asking yourself, what is GHB? I'm happy to tell you. GHB is a party drug that produces feelings of euphoria, confidence, relaxation, and social ability. The side effects, though, can be drowsiness, vomiting, mood swings, unconsciousness, respiratory collapse, and in extreme cases, death. The risk of overdose also increases when combined with other drugs or alcohol. It's commonly known as liquid ecstasy or blue nitro and is commonly swallowed or injected, but it can also be inserted anally as well. So if you're asking yourself, could this be used as a date rape drug or to incapacitate somebody? Yes. Yes, it can. In fact, in 2016, a serial killer by the name of Stephen Port was given a life sentence for poisoning 4 young men with lethal doses of GHB. Now, it is worth noting, that this is a drug that can be used recreationally with consent. But it's also absolutely worth investigating the fact that this is commonly a predator's weapon of choice because it can easily be slipped into someone's drink. Now, just because Chris's autopsy didn't show signs of sexual assault, that doesn't mean he wasn't drugged. Now, even though this drug can be used recreationally, I think it's also definitely worth noting that from what we know, Chris definitely did not do drugs. Keep in mind, he was an athlete. He was the captain of the lacrosse team. Not saying that, those kids don't do drugs ever, but typically college athletes aren't drug tested, and most of them wouldn't risk that. His friends have also been pretty adamant that he did not do recreational drugs. So, just, needed to clear that up. But this is where it gets even more confusing and a bit frustrating because experts pointed out and confirmed that the GHB in his system was a naturally occurring level from decomposition. Now, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a coroner, but I have read that before, that this can occur in the human body during decomposition. Um, so I'm not going to go further into that theory, just that it does occur in decomp. And I guess that the levels that were present during the autopsy were within that range. But another strange thing, though, that came from the discovery of his body in his autopsy was that there was no bruising on Chris's body. So once again, if they're trying to say he was thrown over a bridge, there's no bruising, there's no broken bones, none of that was present. And that could indicate foul play, but there was just none of it was there. And what his parents found even more strange is that the naturally occurring bruises from, his lacrosse practices were completely absent as well. Not a single bruise on his body. There were also insects found on his body that were not typical for the Mississippi River in the wintertime. His body showed surprisingly very little decay, and this kind of puzzled experts who said that the river's freezing temperatures could have slowed down the process, but the lack of water damage in his pristine clothing suggests he may have been kept elsewhere before being placed in the water. There was hardly any water in his lungs, suggesting that he had frozen to death on land. He had not drowned. Because initially they were saying that they think it was a drowning. He was thrown over the bridge or he somehow ended up in the water and he drowned. But there was not enough water in his lungs to suggest that. So how did he end up in the water? Remember, he was caught on some branches actually in the river when he was found. And Chris's parents still want answers. Steve and Jan Jenkins never stopped searching for answers. Steve told CBS News, quote, "We just want to know what happened to our son. He didn't deserve to die like that," end quote. Before Chris's body had been found, friends organized searches along the riverbanks and through tunnels of nearby Nicollet Island, an area, like I said, riddled with caves and graffiti and rumors of underground parties. Some even believe that Chris's body may have been hidden there for months before surfacing. It is just very strange that the search parties went, all out trying to find this poor, sweet boy. And somehow his body ended up being found where they had already searched. So, of course, theories are going to circulate, and circulate they did. Theories from, the jealous lover, Mike Casey, to bar security cover ups, the bouncer, to even possible links with the smiley face killer cases. And I know some of you were probably already thinking that because the minute I read how he was found, that's exactly what I thought too. If you're familiar with those killings, you know it was a series of unsolved drownings of young men across the Midwest. But despite renewed attention and modern forensic tools, the truth remains very elusive. We still do not have any answers about what happened to Chris Jenkins. None. 2 decades later, this stands as one of Minnesota's most chilling cold cases. A story of a young man full of life, betrayed by the night, and his family still haunted by unanswered questions. Just absolutely awful. This poor family deserves some answers. His friends deserve answers, his loved ones. And I know I always say that in these cases, and I mean it. I will say it with my whole chest because can you even imagine? I don't want to imagine it at all, but for the sake of these stories, I try to because it's impossible to know that kind of pain if you've never dealt with it yourself. But it's so, so important to look at it through the lens of what if that was my child, my grandchild, my niece or my nephew, my friend, my teammate? Like you have to look at it from a human perspective. And I will always want justice for these families and I will always want answers for them. And because this case is still unsolved, this is where we have to get into those theories. So you've heard all of them. Let's get into them. The suicide theory, number one, just from what we know about Chris and his personality, what his friends and family said, this is highly unlikely. Chris's body showed no injuries consistent with falling from a bridge, so he didn't throw himself over a bridge, and we don't think anyone threw him over a bridge. He had no broken bones. His clothes were neat. His hair was in his hand. His arms were crossed, and he did not just drown himself. And then there's the accident theory. Was it an accidental death? Also very doubtful considering he was clutching his own hair. And just the way his body was found, I don't think it was an accidental death. Also, falling into the frigid river would have caused some kind of immediate, struggle signs if it was accidental and no signs were present. So that one I am not too keen on that one. Now the homicide theory. There are several possibilities that emerged here. The first one was Jeremy Alford, right? His presence that night and his violent history makes him a candidate. However, Chris showed no trauma, which seems inconsistent with Alford's past because it just doesn't seem consistent with how Chris was found. So that one, I'm not sure. Not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying it didn't happen. It's just it wouldn't match what he typically does to his victims. Mike Casey. Now, Mike, his connection was to Ashley. His presence as a security that night and the parking garage evidence kind of make him a suspect here. Minneapolis police never questioned him, though, citing concerns about disrupting his family. Because as it would turn out, Mike wasn't just a police officer, he was also a family man. He was married, he had kids, and he also just really loved hanging around Ashley, who was 21, because that's not weird. And we all understand, I think, how the police feel about questioning one of their own. So I get that they don't want to ruin an innocent person's life if they're innocent or, disrupt their personal life. But if he was there that night or is tied into this at all, I feel like everyone there or around this situation should have been questioned. Why was he not questioned? Some speculate that Chris may have discovered an inappropriate relationship between Mike and Ashley, sparking a confrontation. I I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know if that's a fact. I feel like his other friends who were there would have corroborated that if that is really what happened. So this is another one that I'm a little shaky on. Would it make sense if there was a corroboration that like, yeah, he got into a confrontation with Mike Casey about, you know, his girlfriend borrowing some of his uniform? Yes, perhaps. Now, all I'm going to say about this theory, and agree or disagree, whatever. I'm not trying to make Ashley the villain here. She's not. I don't know what happened. I wasn't there. All I'm saying is if my boyfriend were to be kicked out of a bar or leave a bar in the middle of the night and it is 20 degrees outside and he doesn't have a jacket or any of his belongings, at the very least, I don't care how drunk I am or if we got into a fight or anything, I'm walking outside to make sure that he gets home safely. Because what do you mean you just let him walk out there with none of his stuff? I guess what I'm trying to say is just be a good human. If someone leaves and they are inebriated and they could potentially be put at risk in that environment, walk out with them, make sure they get home safely, call them a cab. They didn't have Uber then, no, but there were cabs and other means of transportation. There were ways to make sure that he could have gotten home safely. So I'm just a little confused here about why why she just kind of let him go out. Maybe she thought he would come back. I don't know. Again, wasn't there. No clue. But I think this situation with Mike it's a little weird in my personal opinion. I know that she tried to go and return his stuff the next day, but babe, how do you think he was getting home if you have all of his stuff? Like, how's he getting into his house? How, how is he contacting anybody? Like, that part genuinely kind of upsets me just because there could have been some things put in place there to help him get home safely. Again, I am in no way trying to make her a villain here. I'm thinking logically about the situation. And I get that they were all drinking. And when you're drinking, nothing is logical. But especially at 21, your frontal lobe isn't even developed yet. But I mean, I've been in that situation where a friend has to leave a bar or gets kicked out or something. We've all been drinking. I'm still making sure that that friend is okay and safe and gets home safely. Um, and if that were my boyfriend, you bet your ass I'd be making sure everything is okay. And I've been in that situation, not as the girlfriend at the bar, but as the girlfriend at home, panicking because boyfriend didn't make it home after a night out. Like, what do you mean? No one has seen him. I was freaking out, absolutely terrified that something happened to him. Turns out he was just an idiot and he got in a tussle with campus police and then ended up in the hospital because he was so freaking inebriated. That relationship did not last much longer, and that is a story for another day. But I'm telling you, I've been in that situation, and it is not a good feeling to not know what has happened to the person you're dating at the time because you're dating them for a reason. You like them, you have feelings for them, right? You're concerned for their safety. So, yeah, this theory, I could go on, but I will stop there and you guys can come up with your own conclusion about that one. Now, if we look at the other suspects, the other theories, it would be, the bar owner, the bouncers, maybe even a bar patron, someone offering a ride to maybe even another party, perhaps on Nicollet Island. We mentioned before that there are underground tunnels that may have hidden his body until it ended up in the river. That's really all we know about that theory. All the stuff about the bar owner telling his employees not to mention anything, I do feel like that's a little strange, but again, not verified. It's just hearsay. So that's all we have to go off of for that. And finally, we have the smiley face killer theory. So let's go over the smiley face murders really quick, just like a quick recap of them. If you don't know the story, I will probably eventually cover it. Between the years of like 1990 and 2010, young, promising college men, often athletes or honor students, were just disappearing and then showing up near bodies of water across the Midwest and the Northeast. Victims like Patrick McNeil, Brian Wilson, and Todd Gieb all of their disappearances, they have very, very similar patterns. They had nights out with friends, isolation or being separated from the group, and then later they were discovered in water under suspicious circumstances. Police classified them as accidental drownings, but many believe that there was a serial killer or a gang of killers at work, the smiley face murders, and they would often graffiti, like spray paint a smiley face near the site of the bodies. Todd Gieb, specifically, he was found floating vertically with antidepressants in his system, and his gravestone had a smiley face sticker on it. So that is one of the most chilling aspects of his death, and I hate it so much. He was found in a private lake in Michigan, and he was discovered, I believe, in 2005. So just right around that same time. When you look at the death of Chris Jenkins, there are some very striking similarities in his death. And obviously, that is going to raise a shit ton of questions with this theory. But it was never really confirmed. It was just a theory that people had because these young men just kept showing up in bodies of water. And I mean, this theory, it hasn't stopped, you guys, because even as recently as 2022, a 23-year-old boy named Bryce Boca went missing on October 30th in Eagan, Minnesota, after being dropped off with his friends by a Lyft driver near his apartment. And then prior to that, in 2016, a 17-year-old boy named Jeremy Jourdain went missing from Bemidji, Minnesota on October 31st. To this day, both boys are still missing. No one knows what happened to them, and they went missing on Halloween or the day before, just like Chris Jenkins. Then, yep, there's more. There are the bodies that are now turning up in the Houston Bayou that a former detective wanted to connect to the smiley face theory. Obviously, that's very far from these disappearances in Minnesota, but it's been 25 years, and it wouldn't be the first time a serial killer or killers targeted a new location after a long cool off period. Like, that happens. And this news was as recent as yesterday. I just read this article yesterday about another body in the Houston Bayou. There isn't enough evidence necessarily to corroborate the smiley face theory, since some of the victims have been both men and women, not just men this time. And also because some didn't fit the age profile of being, young college age men. Either way, though, people are clinging to that theory. So it definitely has not faded. It's all, it's all so awful. I mean, whether it was, the bouncers that played a hand in this or someone else, whoever it was, they got away with it, and his family deserves justice. It absolutely was not a suicide or accidental death. The situations surrounding their deaths were odd. It's not out of the realm of possibility. It is very weird how it kind of ties into that whole theory. I have so many questions. Like, I am not a doctor or a scientist, and I'm not pretending to be one. I am just speculating once again because this is a podcast. But if the body was barely in decomp due to the cold temperatures, as they were saying, then what would the level of GHB, what would it be? What level of GHB would then be present? I do also find it a little strange that there were bugs found on his body that were not consistent with insects that would be around that time of year. It is very cold in Minnesota that time of year, and it's really baffling. And as much as I love to explore a good conspiracy theory as much as the next person, this is someone's life. This is someone's child. We need actual answers. So these are all just theories that, we've gone through to kind of try and make sense of what happened. The fact is, it doesn't make sense. And while some parts of it might, other parts aren't really connecting. The evidence in this story leaves enough unanswered questions to keep us digging and theorizing. I hope that his family and his friends are doing their best to heal and that they can keep fighting for answers even this many years later, because as we know, cold cases don't always stay cold. And, I hope that one day all of these families of these young men get the answers and the closure that they deserve. But yeah, that is our story this week. Sorry that I didn't have a nice little ending tied up in a little bow for you, but sometimes that's just how these cases go. I hope I did his case some justice. It's really hard to do these unsolved cases and then be like, well, I hope you guys have a great day. But I do genuinely hope you guys have a great day. Next week is a paranormal episode. We're going to dive into some creepy things. So that'll be fun. It's always fun. And don't forget to send in your stories, you guys, for the Booze Clues episode this month. Remember, it is a Halloween themed episode. So any Halloween themed stories that you have, funny, scary, terrifying, traumatizing, send them my way. And keep an eye out for the new merch. I'm just getting a few little details worked out, and then I'll be up and ready for you guys to purchase if you want, which, I mean, you should. It's spooky season and everyone needs a spooky season sweater. So keep an eye out for that. And when it's ready, I will post it. But that is all I have for you guys today. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. And as always, remember to trust your lizard brain. Until next time, goodbye.